Context: I'm a 44-year-old man who has been married to my wife, Emma, for 12 years. We met back in college, and I thought I found the perfect woman. Charming, beautiful, and someone I could trust. As time went on, I climbed the ranks in my field, becoming one of the most influential people in my state. My career in the tech industry boomed, and I built a significant fortune, which allowed us to live a comfortable life in our upscale neighborhood. Emma had everything she could possibly want: luxury cars, designer clothes, and endless vacations. Little did I know, for the past 8 months, she had been secretly reconnecting with her ex-boyfriend, Tom, behind my back. Tom was your typical high school sweetheart type. Flashy, smooth-talking, and, from what I eventually uncovered, living well beyond his means. Emma never lied outright to me about her activities, but she had a talent for omitting the truth and hiding things in plain sight. I had no reason to doubt her, so I let her live her life. My trust turned out to be my biggest mistake. I found out about the affair in the most unexpected way, at a party we threw in our mansion for our closest friends and colleagues. There were about 50 people, all from different parts of our lives, gathered in our home that night. The air was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and upbeat music. Emma was the perfect hostess, smiling at everyone, making sure the drinks were flowing, and charming the guests like she always did. I was chatting with one of my business partners, Joe, when I noticed Emma receiving a message on her phone. She quickly glanced at the screen and smirked in a way I hadn't seen before. I wouldn't have thought much of it if Joe hadn't commented casually, "Tom's still keeping in touch, huh? It's funny how some old flames never quite die out." It was as if a switch flipped in my mind. I realized I'd been missing something all along. Emma's late-night yoga classes, her sudden need for space, and her insistence on keeping her phone locked. It all started to add up. I didn't confront her immediately, though. No, I'm not the type to act without a plan. I decided to bide my time and do my research. If she thought I wouldn't catch on, she clearly didn't know me as well as she thought. I'm not the guy you cheat on and expect to walk away unscathed. After that party, I couldn't get Joe's words out of my head. I started digging into Emma's behavior with a different lens, using the same analytical skills that had helped me succeed in my career. At first, I felt like a fool for not noticing sooner. The clues were there. I just never thought to question them. Her yoga classes suddenly appeared on nights when I worked late, and she'd become unusually protective of her phone, taking it to the bathroom or silencing it during dinner. But I needed more than just suspicion, I needed proof. So, I did what any tech-savvy guy in my position would do. I used a hidden app to monitor her phone activities. It took less than a day for the notifications to start piling up. Late-night messages from a number saved as TB, Tom's initials, revealed everything. They exchanged sweet nothings, reminisced about their high school days, and even planned little rendezvous when I was supposedly too busy with work. I felt a mix of anger and relief as I scrolled through their conversations. Anger because this was a woman I trusted with everything I had. Relief because now I had a clear path forward. But before I made my next move, I needed to see it with my own eyes. One evening, I told Emma I had a business trip out of town. She seemed relieved, a reaction she tried to hide behind a fake smile, and I pretended not to notice. Instead of going to the airport, I parked a few blocks away from our house. I knew if my suspicions were right, Tom would show up that night. And sure enough, just after 9 p.m., a beat-up sedan pulled into our driveway. I watched from my hidden spot as Emma opened the door for Tom with a smile that stung worse than any words ever could. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the casual way she greeted him, as if our marriage meant nothing. But instead of storming into the house, I took photos. I needed everything documented for what I had planned. With the evidence secured, I drove off into the night, my mind racing with ideas for the next phase. I knew I could easily destroy her in court, but that wasn't enough. I wanted to hit her where it hurt the most, her lifestyle. And Tom? I wanted him to feel the weight of his poor choices, too. As much as it hurt to see those texts, I knew I had to stay cool. I played my role as the oblivious husband perfectly, continuing our normal routines as if I had no idea about her secret life. But behind the scenes, I got busy. I began to lay the groundwork for what I had in mind. Something that would leave her and Tom wishing they'd never crossed me. I knew I needed the best lawyer in town, someone who would help me use every legal loophole available. That's when I turned to David, a longtime friend and a shark in the courtroom. We met in his downtown office, surrounded by dark wood paneling and leather chairs. I told him everything, showed him the texts, the photos I'd taken of Tom's car in our driveway when I pretended to be on a business trip. David listened, a calculating smile spreading across his face. You've got a solid case for divorce with adultery, but it's not just about winning, is it? You want to ruin them, don't you? He asked, leaning forward with interest. Exactly, I replied, barely able to contain the satisfaction in my voice. I want to make sure she leaves with nothing, and I want Tom to feel the heat. David nodded, a glint of understanding in his eyes. We spent hours drafting the divorce papers, making sure every clause was airtight. We structured everything to ensure that any assets I had were protected. I shifted investments into accounts she couldn't access, changed the ownership of our home, and even moved some of our savings into a trust that she couldn't touch. David also had the foresight to lock down our joint credit cards and freeze Emma out of any accounts that she might try to use as a lifeline. With everything in motion, I set the stage for the big reveal. I told Emma that I had to leave town for a business trip, making sure she thought I'd be gone for several days. I even packed a suitcase and drove to the airport, but I never boarded a flight. Instead, I parked in a secluded spot just a few blocks away from our house and waited. Sure enough, just after 9 p.m., I saw a beat-up old sedan pull into the driveway. Tom got out, glancing around like a thief before Emma opened the door for him. They embraced, and I snapped photos from the shadows, capturing every moment. Watching them laugh together, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I stayed calm. I knew these photos would be worth more than 1,000 words in court. I waited in the car for hours, watching them through the window, seeing them pour drinks and cozy up together like they didn't have a care in the world. But they didn't know that their little secret was about to blow up in their faces. I finally drove off, feeling more determined than ever. I had the proof I needed, and now it was time to execute the next part of my plan. Back at home, I pretended that everything was fine. Emma seemed more relaxed than she had in months, probably thinking that she was in the clear. She even suggested that we throw another dinner party, as if nothing had changed. I agreed, knowing that it would be the perfect opportunity to put pressure on her. I made sure to invite our closest friends, including a few influential figures from my industry who could help spread the word when the time came. That evening, our house was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of expensive cigars. Emma played the perfect hostess, while I mingled with our guests, keeping my emotions under tight control. Joe, the same friend who had made the offhand comment about Tom, pulled me aside. "Hey, you seem a little off tonight. Everything okay?" he asked, concern creasing his forehead. I forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind, Joe. Thanks for checking in." He seemed to buy it, but I could see a hint of curiosity in his eyes. I knew that when the truth came out, he'd be one of the first to understand what had really been happening. As the night went on, I noticed Emma receiving a few messages, her phone lighting up with Tom's name. She quickly turned the screen away, not realizing that I already knew who she was messaging. I caught her eye once, and she gave me a sweet smile that almost made me laugh at how easily she thought she could deceive me. I had never felt more certain that my plan was going to work. Emma's little world of secrets was starting to unravel, and I was the one holding the thread. With the divorce papers ready to be served, I turned my attention to Tom. Using a shell company I controlled, I reached out to him as a potential investor for his new business venture. Tom had been trying to break into the real estate market, flipping properties with no real experience or connections. He was desperate for funding, and I made sure he thought he'd hit the jackpot when my company offered him a large loan with seemingly generous terms. Tom eagerly accepted the money, unaware that the repayment terms were designed to crush him if he failed. I'd structured the loan so that even a slight downturn in the market would trigger a financial nightmare for him. And, knowing Tom's lack of financial acumen, I was confident he'd mismanage the funds. As I put these plans into motion, I couldn't help but marvel at how easy it was to manipulate the two of them. Emma thought she had me fooled, and Tom thought he had a bright future ahead of him. But they were both dancing to my tune, and neither of them even realized it. The night I served Emma with the divorce papers, I timed it perfectly. I made sure she was alone at home, catching her off guard with the official documents. When she saw the word adultery written in the papers, she went pale, her hands shaking as she read through the terms. I stood across the room, watching her unravel. "How long have you known?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Long enough to know that you've made your choice, Emma," I replied coldly. "Now I'm making mine." She tried to protest, to argue that it wasn't as serious as I thought, but I shut her down. I laid out every piece of evidence I had gathered, the photos, the text messages, the credit card charges. She went silent, realizing that there was no way out. I watched her break down, feeling nothing but a sense of grim satisfaction. Emma's initial shock gave way to a flurry of emotions: denial, anger, and finally, desperation. "You can't do this to me. We have a life together," she exclaimed, tears streaming down her cheeks. I remained stoic, watching as the woman who had betrayed me tried to regain her footing. "You made your choices, Emma. You wanted Tom. Now you can have him. I'm just making sure you don't walk away with anything. You'll see how this works out for you." The gravity of my words settled in the air between us. I could see the wheels turning in her head, realizing just how precarious her situation was. "You think this is over? I'll fight you for every penny," she yelled, her voice filled with defiance, but the tremor betrayed her fear. I simply smirked. "Go ahead, Emma. Just remember that I have all the evidence, and I'm not afraid to use it." I turned to leave, relishing the thought of the storm I had set in motion. As I stepped out, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from David, my lawyer. "Heard through the grapevine that Emma's reached out to some friends for help. She's panicking. This could get messy." I smiled, knowing I had her exactly where I wanted her. Meanwhile, Tom was starting to feel the heat. My investment loan, which had initially seemed like a lifeline, was now turning into a noose around his neck. He had poured the funds into a property that was falling apart, and the repairs were costing far more than he anticipated. I had made sure to give him just enough rope to hang himself, knowing he'd be too proud to ask for help. One afternoon, while he sat in his cluttered office, the phone rang. It was his lender, calling to remind him about an upcoming payment that he was woefully unprepared for. "We need to discuss your repayment options," the voice on the other end stated flatly. Tom's face blanched as he realized he was in deeper than he thought. "Can we work something out? I've got this great property. It's just a little behind schedule," he stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. The lender was not sympathetic. "You either pay up or we'll have to foreclose. You've got 30 days. As he hung up, Tom's hands trembled. He leaned back in his chair, the reality of his situation crashing down on him. He was drowning, and it was only going to get worse. Back at the house, Emma was doing her best to rally support. She reached out to our mutual friends, spinning a tale of woe about how I had betrayed her trust and blindsided her with the divorce. She begged for sympathy, but the truth was like a shadow following her. No one believed her lies anymore. They had seen the evidence, the broken trust laid bare. During one of these desperate calls, Emma spoke to Sarah, her longtime friend. "You have to help me. I can't lose everything. He's doing this out of spite. I didn't mean for it to happen." Sarah, who had known both of us for years, responded cautiously. "Emma, you really need to think about what you've done. You can't expect people to just take your side without understanding the full story." Emma slammed her phone down, frustrated and angry. She had hoped that her charm would still work, but the veneer of trust she had built was cracking, and she could feel the walls closing in. Desperate to regain control of her narrative, Emma concocted a plan. She called Tom and arranged to meet him at a nearby cafe, thinking that together they could come up with a strategy to counter my moves. When they met, Tom looked haggard, the weight of his financial troubles evident in his sunken eyes. "I don't know how we're going to get through this," He admitted, glancing around as if he expected someone to overhear. You said he wouldn't do this to you, but now look, I'm in deep trouble. Emma, determined to appear strong, leaned in closer. We need to fight back. We can't let him take everything. If we work together, we can come up with a plan to turn the tables. Tom nodded, still reeling from his situation. I can't afford to lose any more money. If we can get some dirt on him, maybe we can threaten him with it? But Emma, in her panic, didn't realize that Tom's desperation would only cloud his judgment. They plotted, full of bravado, not knowing how deep the hole they were digging for themselves truly was. In the meantime, I was busy fortifying my defenses. I kept close tabs on Emma's and Tom's movements, gathering more evidence while meticulously planning my next moves. I knew that exposing them fully would be the icing on the cake, but I had to wait for the right moment. One night, I stumbled upon a hidden email address that Emma had used to communicate with Tom, one she had thought I wouldn't discover. I hacked into it and found a series of emails discussing their plans to get back at me. They discussed spreading rumors about my business dealings, hoping to tarnish my reputation. Let's make it look like he's been mismanaging funds. One of the emails read, that'll force him to back down. I couldn't help but chuckle at their naivete. They thought they were playing a clever game, but they were only digging their own graves. I copied the emails and sent them straight to David, letting him know what I'd found. I also decided to reach out to a few of my contacts in the media. I didn't plan to go public just yet, but I wanted to plant a seed that would blossom into a full-blown scandal. A few carefully placed whispers here and there could ensure that when the truth came out, it would come with a lot of noise. I invited a few influential reporters to a charity gala I was hosting. Emma, thinking it was just another chance to win back favor, volunteered to help with the planning. I let her think she was still in control, all while orchestrating my revenge behind the scenes. As the gala approached, the tension between us was palpable. Emma tried to put on a brave face, but I could see through her facade. She was unraveling, and I couldn't have been more pleased. The night of the gala arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The venue was adorned with elegant decorations, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing beneath the surface. Emma was working the room, engaging with guests, but she was unaware that I had an agenda. As I mingled with guests, I could see Emma getting increasingly anxious, especially when she spotted Tom across the room. I had arranged for him to be there under the guise of being just friends, but the reality was that I wanted them both to feel the heat of their choices. Midway through the evening, I made a speech, highlighting the importance of integrity and trust. In business and in life, it's our relationships that define us, I said, casting a pointed glance at Emma. Loyalty and honesty are essential. The crowd applauded, but I could see the realization dawning on Emma. The walls were closing in, and everyone could feel the tension. After my speech, I stepped aside and let my plan unfold. While Emma and Tom were in the middle of their frantic plotting, I had a journalist poised to get the scoop on their affair. During the gala, I had discreetly informed the media about Emma's infidelity, framing it as an insider tip. The story spread like wildfire, and within hours, headlines blared across the local news. Power couple's marriage shattered by high school romance. Emma's face turned beet red when she learned of the article breaking during the gala. I watched from a distance as the whispers began circulating through our friends. Did you hear about Emma? She's been cheating. The embarrassment was palpable. She rushed to my side, her voice trembling with anger. You did this. You set me up, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. I calmly replied, you did this to yourself, Emma. All I did was expose the truth. As she stormed away, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The look on her face was everything I had hoped for. A mixture of shock, betrayal, and confusion. As news of Emma's affair spread, Tom found himself in a precarious position. His name was dragged through the mud along with Emma's, and the fallout was swift. Investors started pulling out of his failing project, and rumors began circulating about his incompetence. Just as I had planned, he was now the subject of scorn rather than sympathy. In the days that followed, I received frantic calls from Tom. "You think this is funny? You've ruined everything," he screamed, his voice trembling with anger. I feigned innocence. "I didn't do anything but provide the truth, Tom. You should have thought twice about the company you kept." As he raged, I felt an odd sense of satisfaction. Not only had I destroyed Emma's reputation, but I was also taking down the man who had tried to take everything from me. Emma's desperation only deepened. The public humiliation had taken its toll, and her attempts to regain control were futile. She threw herself into damage control, trying to salvage her reputation, but the whispers were louder than her pleas. One afternoon, I saw her sitting in a cafe, her eyes red from crying, her demeanor defeated. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity, but it quickly faded as I reminded myself that she had brought this upon herself. I decided to confront her once more, to see how low she had truly fallen. "Hey, Emma," I said casually as I approached her table. "How's the damage control going?" She glared at me, anger flaring in her eyes. "You think this is a joke? You've destroyed my life." "I didn't destroy your life, Emma. You did that all on your own," I replied coolly, watching as her bravado crumbled. The real turning point came when Emma's friends began to distance themselves. At first, they rallied around her, but as the truth sank in, they grew tired of her excuses. Sarah was one of the first to confront her. "Emma, we need to talk," Sarah said one day, sitting down across from her. "This isn't what I thought you were doing. You're better than this." Emma's facade cracked, and she found herself grappling with the reality of her situation. "I thought I could make it work with Tom. I never meant to hurt anyone." "That's the problem," Sarah replied gently. "You've hurt a lot of people. Maybe it's time to take responsibility for your actions." Emma was left alone, her friends abandoning her one by one, leaving her to fend for herself. I watched from the sidelines, feeling a strange mixture of sympathy and satisfaction. The woman who had betrayed me was now facing the consequences of her choices, and there was no one left to save her. As Emma's world crumbled, I decided it was time for the final push. I met with David again, discussing the upcoming divorce proceedings. We laid out a strategy that would ensure she received nothing. "Since you have all the evidence of her infidelity, we can argue for a complete dissolution of any claim she might have to your assets," David explained, tapping away at his laptop. "We'll make it clear that her actions not only violated your trust, but also affected your business dealings." I nodded, feeling a sense of power swell within me. "Let's make sure she understands the full extent of her mistakes." David chuckled. "Oh, she will. I'll ensure that her name is dragged through the mud, just like she did to yours. It's time to give her a taste of her own medicine." The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and I felt an odd mix of anticipation and dread. Emma entered the courtroom, her posture straight but her eyes betraying her anxiety. She knew she was backed into a corner. As the hearing progressed, David presented our case, laying out the evidence of her infidelity with calculated precision. Emma's lawyer attempted to counter, but it was like trying to hold back a flood. The truth was on my side, and everyone could see it. "I have evidence," David announced dramatically, pulling out the emails and texts I had collected. "These communications clearly show a premeditated intent to deceive my client and to harm his reputation." The judge's eyebrows shot up, and Emma's face fell. I could almost feel her heart sink as she realized how deep she was in. She glanced at Tom, who sat in the back, his face twisted in regret. "Your Honor," her lawyer stammered, "we ask for leniency." "There's no leniency here," the judge replied, cutting him off. "Given the evidence presented, I'll rule in favor of the plaintiff." Emma's face paled, and I felt a rush of satisfaction wash over me. The ruling was swift, and as the gavel came down, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. Emma was left with nothing, her attempts to reclaim her life obliterated. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving her and Tom to grapple with the mess they had made. In the following weeks, Emma's life spiraled further into chaos. With no financial support and her reputation in shambles, she struggled to find a job. The few friends who remained slowly drifted away, and soon, she was left with no one to turn to. Tom, on the other hand, was facing his own demons. The financial pressure mounted, and he quickly found himself in debt. The loans I had orchestrated now weighed heavily on his shoulders, and he was drowning in his failures. Just when I thought Emma was down for the count, she made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She called me, her voice shaky but determined. "I want to talk. We need to settle this. I can't keep living like this." I couldn't resist the opportunity. "What do you want to talk about, Emma?" "The life you threw away. I'm not asking for much, just a chance to rebuild," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'll do whatever it takes." I chuckled softly. "You think you can just erase the past? I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. You'll need to face the consequences of your actions." Her silence spoke volumes, and I knew she was beginning to understand the reality of her situation. As weeks turned into months, Emma continued to flounder. Her once bright future now reduced to a series of dead-end jobs and lost friendships. I kept an eye on her, feeling a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. She was paying for her mistakes, and I felt no remorse. One day, I received an unexpected message from Sarah, Emma's friend who had distanced herself. "I just wanted to let you know, Emma's really struggling. I think she's starting to understand how her choices affected everyone." I took a moment to consider my response. "I hope she's learned her lesson. Some things can't be undone." Sarah replied, "I think she's starting to realize that. It's just sad to see someone go from having everything to losing it all." Her words resonated with me, reminding me that while I was seeking revenge, Emma was facing a harsh reality. Finally, one evening, Emma reached out once more. This time, there was a tone of resignation in her voice. "I've realized how selfish I was. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm sorry." Her apology surprised me, but I wasn't ready to let go of the past just yet. "You have a long way to go before you can make amends, Emma. Trust is hard to rebuild." She sighed, the weight of her mistakes heavy in the silence. "I know. I just want a chance to start over." I pondered her words. Maybe there was a glimmer of hope for her, but I wasn't in a position to offer it. "You'll have to earn that chance, and it won't come easy, but you'll have to face the consequences of your actions first." As time passed, I watched Emma work to rebuild her life. She took on jobs she had once considered beneath her, slowly gaining a sense of humility. I still felt no obligation to help her, but I couldn't deny that I admired her resilience. Tom, meanwhile, fell further into his debts, struggling to keep his head above water. Our paths crossed occasionally, and he would shoot me furtive glances, full of regret. Eventually, Emma found her footing and began to rebuild her relationships, starting with Sarah. I heard through the grapevine that she was volunteering at a local shelter, trying to give back and atone for her past mistakes. While my own life was flourishing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had orchestrated a great tragedy. Revenge had come at a cost, not just to them but to me as well. I had watched a once vibrant woman fade into shadows, and while it was what I wanted, it left a bitter taste. In the end, life moved on. Emma learned to live with the consequences of her choices, and I continued to thrive in my career. Though the scars remained, we both emerged changed, measured by the lessons we learned through heartbreak and betrayal. And while I wouldn't wish what had happened to either of us, I couldn't deny that the experience had shaped me in ways I would carry for a lifetime.